And meeting will be recorded
Right.
and we put it in YouTube also.
Okay.
Uh,
බඩගෝස්තරයට වැඩ කර මොක්ට කතාබෝත්
huh? I welcome all of you for Marx School number 61. We started Marx School during the COVID pandemic because we were not able to meet physically. But even after the pandemic, we continue because it's a kind of a good discussion forum that everybody come and participate. Today, our speaker is Professor Balveer Arora. He is Emeritus Professor of Political Science at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi, India. And he was also a rector of Jawaharlal Nehru University during 2002 to 2005 period. In addition to that, he is the founding chairman of the Center for Multilateral Federalism, and also he is chairman of the Water for People India. He's a president of the board of Water for People India Trust. He has many things written about federalism and power sharing in diverse societies. And has many books and writings in journals. And he did his PhD in Paris, Sorbonne. That was, as he said now, that was something late 1960s. So I thank you very much, Professor Balveer Arora, for accepting our invitation to talk on Indian election and its implication on federalism to Marx School and the Sri Lankan audience. With that, and without further ado, I invite Professor Balveer Arora to make his presentation. He might take about 30, 40 minutes, and then we can have a discussion on the subject. Sometimes you can ask other questions also. With that, I invite Professor Balveer Arora to make his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Somernath, and thank you for having invited me. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about India and what has been happening here. Just a small clarification. The center that I founded in 2010 is the Center for Multi-Level Federalism, because we are looking at three levels: the center, the states, and local self-government. So that is the center where I am still working. Now, we are talking about an election which has just concluded. The results were declared on 4th of June, and they came as a bit of a surprise to a lot of people, partly because on the 1st of June, when the last voting ended, immediately after that, exit polls were announced. And some 10 of them, all of them showed massive numbers for the ruling party, the BJP. The ruling party had 303 seats in the 17th Lok Sabha, and the cutoff point is 272 in a house of 543. So the projections went from 320 to 350 to, well, didn't quite reach 400, but they were showing a big victory for the BJP. As it turned out, and there is going to be an inquiry as to whether these exit polls were in some way rigged, because they were linked to stock market movements, and there was a lot of trading around these announcements. But in fact, the BJP ended with a score far lower, not even enough to have a majority on its own, and had to revive something that had fallen into disuse, which was an alliance called the National uh, Development Alliance, I think, NDA, where they had nominal members, but the BJP was not really consulting them. There were no official mechanisms to involve them. There was not even any seat sharing in the cabinet for most of the time. So, what you had at the beginning of the period when the elections were announced, that is in mid-March, you had a BJP government. You had a BJP government, but more than that, you had a Modi government. That was how the government was projected, highly personalized, and everything revolved around the leader, that was Mr. Modi. Now, two things. There are some analysts who have compared the 2024 result to the 1977 result. Now, if you recall, the 1977 result was a massive repudiation of the prime ministership of Indira Gandhi, where she lost heavily as a result of her policies during the emergency. It is not quite the same um, uh, same level of repudiation, but it was, even though the BJP got 240 seats, it was a repudiation of the charismatic leadership of Mr. Modi, which now stands somewhat tattered in terms of the aura that he had built up around his personality, and the personality cult that had been developed. So let me take you back to March of 2024, the setting of the stage when the announcement was made. There were two factors. One was a fear of fraud and of institutional manipulation. The Election Commission, which is supposed to be neutral and preside over the, not just preside, organize the elections, was reconstituted in a hurry by the government. And then the fear was that there would be, in some way, manipulation. That was the major sort of as I said, the fear of electoral fraud. The backdrop to this event was the uh, inauguration of a temple in Ayodhya to Ram Lalla, who was the boy Ram, which is a temple that was built on the ruins or after the demolition of the Babri Masjid Mosque. But that is another story. But it is important to recall that this was a sort of crowning glory moment for Mr. Modi. Parties go to elections on two or three platforms. One is the platform of promises. So in 2014, when he was new, he was coming from Gujarat, came with a number of promises. And at that time, the record of governance of Gujarat was not projected because it was a tainted record. There had been the riots or the pogrom where a lot of Muslim lives were lost in 2002, the following Godhra. And therefore, Gujarat, the only aspect that was projected was that here was a chief minister of a state who was coming to the center to revive federalism, to uh, launch cooperative federalism, to change the pattern which had developed of a top-down federal system. Promises, many of them were not kept, extravagant promises, which as the number two in the cabinet, Mr. Amit Shah, later said, these were uh, in Hindi called Chunavi Jumla, which means they are there for the election, but not seriously meant. One of the first acts that he performed was to abolish the Planning Commission, which had been set up in 1950-51 under Jawaharlal Nehru. So that was one of the ways. Promises was for 2014. In 2019, there was some projection of performance, and that was in space, bullet trains, and the global ranking. And this, when we came to 2024, the main thrust of the campaign was the bright future that awaited India for developed India 2047, the centenary of the independence, and the idea that uh, India was widely respected as a Vishwa Guru and was destined to take the leadership of the global South. A campaign that was built on projections of glory, uh, uh, projections of a glorious future. The second thing that I would like to flag is the length of the campaign and the length of the voting. The campaign lasted from the middle of March till the middle of May. Then the voting started, and the voting was in 7 phases, stretching over 6 or 7 more weeks. Extremely hot weather. So therefore, the the need to hasten the process was not accepted by the Election Commission, and nobody really understood why it was being prolonged for such a long time when it was possible to shorten it. The two explanations that were given was that it enabled the star campaigner, because there was only one main campaigner for the party. The star campaigner, Mr. Modi, to be able to travel around the country and physically be present in all the states where campaigning was needed. So this is the uh, campaign which dragged on. Two or three things happened. The election which began and the final election which was on 1st June, it seemed that the whole picture had changed. It was no longer the election with which uh, the process had started. This was an unintended consequence, and the way in which this election unfolded, the first thing that came to the fore was a decline in participation. And that sent alarm bells ringing, because it was somehow coming through that the BJP voters were not taking the trouble to go and vote. So that was one major thing. There was a shifting of gears between the phases. Now, it's normal in a federal polity that local issues crop up. And so, for each phase, when the campaigning was going on for a state, the tone of the campaign would change. There were thematic shifts, and there was the major thing that came out as the campaign progressed, and the tone uh, deteriorated, civility declined, it became extremely vicious in terms of the overtones, notably the Islamophobia and the use of phrases and speeches which are explicitly banned by the Model Code of Conduct, appealing to communal sentiments and trying to generate enmity between religious communities. Unfortunately, the Election Commission didn't act. They sent off a weak letter to the heads of the parties, and this indicated two things. One was the fear that the election was going the wrong way, and the second was the expectation of a polarization around the personality, but also around the issue of Hindutva, which is the political philosophy of the BJP, of uniting Hindus around a political project. As this election progressed, and I'm taking a little time to, because it was a long election, and as I said, a number of things emerged. One other aspect came to the forefront. Government opposition relations had plummeted to an all-time low. Parliament was no longer functioning, and speakers were routinely expelling opposition MPs. There was a mass expulsion of 146 MPs for so-called disorderly behavior and so on. So you had a situation where you were going in for election to a new Lok Sabha with the record of a previous Lok Sabha that had malfunctioned, if one could put it mildly. The second thing that emerged was lateral entry of candidates of the BJP. They were brought in from other parties, sometimes poached, sometimes encouraged to defect, and this was a major factor which had a different kind of consequence for the BJP itself. The way the BJP cadres resented, one, a large number of them were not renominated for tickets, and two, they were replaced by outsiders, as they called them, and they were in fact recent members, entrants to the party. They came in and got the tickets because winnability was the sole criteria, and the way in which the party functioned, the consequence or the conclusion that emerges from it is that the party had lost touch with with its own members and with its own cadres, and they were less than enthusiastic in mobilizing for the votes. So that is the way in which the campaign unfolded and prepared the ground for the results that came. The results showed that there was something seriously wrong within the party, as well as the relationship with the RSS headquartered in Nagpur seemed to have declined at that time. We know this for a fact because the BJP president, who is now a member of the government, said at one time that they did not need the RSS. They needed it earlier in the beginning, but now they had their own cadres and they did not need the RSS cadres. And most recently, Mr. Mohan Bhagwat, on 10th of June, that's a couple of days ago, responded to Mr. Nadda's statement calling for restraint and calling for introspection on why the party had lost. So the intra-parivar dynamics is something that I would like to highlight. The intra-BJP dynamics, the alienation of loyalists, and the absence of collegiate leadership, and the system of incentives, the reward structure was no longer functioning. Now, for any mass organization, those are important elements to keep the system going. Then the question of self above party, a personality cult, a single focus, which was the return to power of Mr. Modi, and it became almost a plebiscite for or against the leader. I think that is something that I would underscore, that this election took on the characteristics of a plebiscite you want me or you don't want me. Having done that, the verdict, even though the BJP emerged as the largest single party, the verdict could only be interpreted as a defeat. A defeat because that resounding mandate that was being sought, initially it was 400 par, which means crossing 400. Then it was toned down. Then it was brought down even further, and it was said that if they come back with the same figures, plus minus 20, it would be considered acceptable. And then it was finally, as I said, way below 303. The final result was a big disappointment and a disavowal of the leader who had staked his personal popularity during the elections, during the campaign. The way in which the judiciary functioned during this period is also something that I would like to mention. The judiciary came up with an important ruling which had a bearing on the elections. And that was the ruling that declared that the electoral bonds scheme, which was floated by the government to fund elections, was illegal, and that the names of both the donors and the recipients had to be made public. Now, it was a half judgment because, on the one hand, the judgment said it was illegal. On the other hand, it left the money, and some 75-80% of it had gone to the ruling party. It left the money with those who had got it and used it during the campaign. But the impression that one got was the credibility and the reputation of the BJP as a party with a difference. And that was the projection initially. That suffered. That the BJP was came to power on an anti-corruption platform, because in 2014 corruption was an issue, and this was a party which now stood exposed as having participated in this illegal fundraising effort, which gave it or damaged its reputation with the electorate. Now, when the results came after this long campaign, and I have spent a little time on the campaign itself, firstly because it was long, and secondly because it showed different aspects cropping up at different stages, and finally led to a result which was more than disappointing for the BJP. What are the implications for federalism, which is what I wanted to discuss, apart from the fact that the centralized model of governance that Mr. Modi has been practicing has suffered a big dent. He came to power with the promise of cooperative federalism. I mentioned this in the beginning in 2014 as a state chief minister. But the functioning of the government in those 10 years showed that there was very little substance in this promise, that states were not consulted. All the mechanisms for the consultation of states were not used, and there was hardly any effort to get them on board for major decisions. Two events took place which further damaged the situation of the uh, economy and affected the population in a big way. The first was the demonetization, where suddenly high denomination notes were withdrawn from circulation because the to ostensibly curb black money and fight terrorism and so on. None of that happened, but the fact is that demonetization led to popular hardship uh, and suffering uh, at the popular level. And the second event was the COVID, which again affected the uh, people livelihood, employment, and pushed many of them below the poverty line. A widespread pauperization that took place during this period, because as you know, the uh, unorganized labor sector accounts for almost 95% of the population, of the labor force rather, and the uh, effect of this pauperization and this um, the unemployment coupled with inflation, no doubt in my mind that it had an impact on the decision, the voters' decision in this election. In a sense, it was a delayed reaction to both these events, but the precarity that they generated, and coupled with the growing inequality in distribution of the fruits of development. Thomas Piketty has talked about it in his laboratory. The fact, I mean, it's basically the difference between the GDP figures, the growth rate as compared to human development and social development. There was a big gap with inequality increasing. The employment and income which rose, which was not uh, reflected, the GDP growth was not reflected in employment because a lot of the employment was without jobs, and therefore this decline is the other factor that I would like to put on the table as one of the reasons why the uh, figures for the BJP were so low. Finally, the return of the federal coalition era. Now, I say that with some words of caution, because what we saw was the abrupt end of what was being called by analysts the return of the single party dominance phase. The single party dominance for that was that took place between 14 and 24, was expected to continue for another 20 years. And abruptly, alliances had to be made and coalitions had to be made. And the two coalition partners, one is from the south, from Andhra Pradesh, Chandrababu Naidu, who has also been sworn in as chief minister of his state because that was the party, that was a state which had legislative elections at the same time. And the second was Mr. Nitish Kumar of Bihar, who again, for the we stopped counting the nth time he switched back to the BJP and the NDA. And so, is it a return to federal coalition? Nominally, yes, but it would take much more than that to say that a new phase of federalism has begun. It is, for the moment, when one looks at um, the government that has been sworn in, it is a BJP government, essentially with a few ministers from the allies, and it is looks at this moment more like a business as usual, resuming where we left off and carrying on with unfinished tasks to be completed. And this is a different phase, and it opens a new chapter where the way in which the NDA will look at coalition politics as a way of uh, reviving cooperative federalism is something that remains to be seen. The main demands of the two new entrants is primarily in terms of increased allocations and funding from the center. There is in existence a category of funding reserved for what is called special category states, what used to be called special category states by the Planning Commission. But then now it is the same states are mainly the Northeast and the Hill states, the NEH. They receive preferential treatment when it comes to loans and grants. Andhra and Bihar are asking for special category status. I think that will not happen because the special category status itself doesn't exist. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is that they are in it for tangible gains for their states. Can we therefore assume that they will be more pro-federal as a whole, whether they will be more promoting the regional interests and working towards a more federal manner of functioning, or will they use this, leverage it to get benefits for their own states, and the matter ends there. So when I talked about the implications for federal democracy, I think it's early days. One should not see this as a revival of federalism in any big way, but it is definitely a new chapter in the way in which India's federal democracy is developing. And I think from that point of view, this has been an important election and could have long-term consequences that we all will watch out for. So thank you very much. I think, hope I have not taken too much time, but I will end there and then we can take up questions.
Right. Thank you, Professor Arora, for a very good presentation on Indian election and its implications on federalism, cooperative federalism. Now for questions and comments. So I invite you to raise your questions or make your comments, and we can have another 30 to 45 minutes discussion. Thank you. May I have one question first? Sorry. May I have a question first? Well, in India, there were very big peasant struggles, I think some time back. But when we come to the election results, those areas like Punjab, they voted for BJP-led coalition. How could we explain that? I mean, when there are so many protests, so many campaigns against the government, especially against 3 laws that government have adopted. But when it comes to the elections, those areas went to the BJP-led alliance. What's the kind of, is it any other reasons rather than economic that that brings out these results? What do you think?
Yes, Sumana, yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. Now, you have brought up an important issue of the farmers' struggle. The farmers' struggle, the farmers of Punjab and Haryana went on a fast, blocked the roads against those 3 laws that they felt were going to harm them, and rightly so. And the government had to withdraw those laws. The election result was in favor of another party called AAP, which took over the government of Punjab. And the BJP is not doing too well still in the Punjab. Now the test will be in Haryana, because assembly elections are scheduled later this year. And the Haryana farmers were also very much involved in this opposition to the farm laws that the Modi government was proposing. So there is a certain consistency in the sense that the BJP has not been able to win over the farmers in a big way. It has made a few successes in 1 or 2 areas, but by and large, it remains an area where the BJP is not doing too well. As I said, we will watch with keen interest how it fares in Haryana. So that antagonism between the farmers and the government remains unresolved, I would say.
Thank you. So can you ask your question?
Yeah, may I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Yeah, my name is Ramesh. I teach political science at the University of Peradeniya. So thank you very much for the fascinating presentation, Professor. I have two questions. One is, indeed, this election results is a victory for India's democracy, because India's democracy was largely attacked by the Modi's government since 2014. And it became a kind of competitive authoritarian state, India became. So that's why these Swedish-based think tank organization, Varieties of Democracy, classified India as an electoral autocracy last year. So in this, against this background, I think Modi's competitive authoritarianism will come to an end in the future. So that's what we hope. But I was wondering when I looked at the election results of Uttar Pradesh, because we expected that Modi will, get a sweeping victory in the Uttar Pradesh because he launched the Ayodhya temple there, and it's largely Hindu majoritarian state. But the election results was completely different. So is that because of Akhilesh Yadav's campaign, or are there any other factors? How do you explain this election results in Uttar Pradesh? My second question is that Modi was planning to do a kind of delimitation of electoral constituencies in India before this election. So he wanted to reduce the number of seats in Lok Sabha in the southern states, and he wanted to increase the seats in northern India, because which is very much favor of Modi's regime in northern India. So is it possible to carry out that delimitation process in this situation? Because there is a major setback for BJP, only 240 seats they got. So now they rely on other constituent parties, as you mentioned Chandrababu Naidu and Nitish Kumar. So is that possible to carry out this delimitation process? Thank you.
Thank you. If I may call you Ramesh. Yes, thank you for a very interesting and informed question. Because you're right, the backsliding of democracy that had taken place, which has been noted by the world, draws attention to two things. One is the role of the media, what is called the Godi media or the lapdog media, where had the media played an independent role, it would have probably made a bigger dent in the number of seats that the BJP had. But why, and the partiality of the election commission. So despite these two factors, the election still was, as I said, a defeat for the BJP. It would have been probably a bigger defeat if the media and the election commission had functioned differently. So that's on the opening remarks that you made. On the question of UP, the results that have come in UP, there are two or three explanations. One is the divisions within the party between the supporters of Yogi, the chief minister, and their antipathy towards Modi, who is not a local. He is not from UP, he is from Gujarat. And so there is one line of explanation which indicates that the BJP voters were not that enthused. They are with Yogi. The implication being that if when the next assembly elections come, you may have a good showing of the BJP under Yogi's leadership. The second factor, which you rightly pointed out, is the Akhilesh Yadav's and the Congress alliance, which is the India coalition. I think it worked in UP and it has shown results. the fallout of the temple, the achievement, I think that was something that did not bring any votes. At this stage, it was considered as something that had been done, and in fact, there were some who said, you can't ask votes in the name of having built a temple. The fact of the matter is that the personal popularity of Modi seems to have declined in UP. And that is reflected in the result. And let us see if the alliance between Akhilesh Yadav and the Congress continues and further strengthens. The two votes that are crucial in UP are the Dalit vote and the Muslim vote. The Muslim vote, by and large, went back to the India alliance. It had vacillated. Part of it had been taken by the BSP of Mayawati. Mayawati drew a blank, it was zero. And I think that party is in crisis even with regard to the Dalits. The second alienation is the Muslim vote, partly because of the very clear anti-Muslim propaganda of the BJP. So you wouldn't have, there was a consolidation to make sure that you didn't vote for the BJP. And partly, if you see the government, after a long time, there is not a single Muslim representation in the new government. There is one Christian and there is one Buddhist. So that is as far as the minority component in the government is concerned. But the decline of the BJP in UP in the Lok Sabha elections is a significant development. What remains to be seen is whether it will be repeated in the assembly elections later, because Yogi, the chief minister, remains firmly in control and powerful with regard to the local party. And it will be a tough fight. It's not going to be a walkover. Your second question relates to delimitation. Yes, the census which was due in 2021 was postponed because of COVID. But it has not been held since then. We are in 24. There is no explanation for why it couldn't be held in 23 or even 22, the latter half. Before delimitation, a census will need to be held. And it is on the basis of the new census figures that the constituency, the delimitation commission, will be asked to recarve the constituency. And what you referred to is that the growth in population of the northern states is much more, and the growth of the southern states, which are more developed economically, is much less. And so if they went purely by population, the logical result is the loss of representation of the southern states. The exact number can be calculated. There are various ways of ensuring. One is to increase the size of the Lok Sabha. There is talk of that because a new Lok Sabha building has been put up, which can seat many more than 543 persons. And there is also the question of implementing the reservation for women. So, whether it will be in addition to the existing seats, or whether it will be very difficult to take it out of the present 543. So these issues are live. There is apprehension in the southern states about losing proportionately their representation in parliament. But I think that a delimitation commission, if it does its job properly, should try to work out an arrangement where this present ratios of representation are not disturbed to the extent that they would be if blindly population remained the only criterion.
Thank you, sir.
Any other question? We can take another 2 or 3 questions before we wind up.
It's a very, it's been a long and arduous campaign, and I don't know how you are placed. I think you're having a lot of rain, but we are still in the north going through 44, 45 degrees every day. So it's the summer has dragged on. It's a long, hot summer, and but I think in the south, I see that the rains, the monsoon has arrived in Bombay and in Kerala.
All right. There are no questions or comments.
I think we can wind up. It's been
Yeah, we can wind up. And thank you very much for your presentation. And there are so many things about federalism because the question is also raised in Sri Lanka. What kind of government is, what kind of state is going to help the country, especially not only economically, but also resolving the national question. So probably some other day we can talk about federalism and its different varieties. And I thank you again for making a very lucid and clear presentation on election and its implications on federalism. Thank you very much, and good night for all.
Thank you. Thank you, Sumana. I'm glad you brought up federalism in Sri Lanka because I remember 2 or 3 visits to Sri Lanka preaching federalism at that time, saying that maybe that is the way in which some solution could be found. But it's a difficult task to get Sri Lanka to adopt federalism. It's not an easy task.
Yeah.
So, but thank you for having invited me, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you and Marx.
Thank you, sir.
Ramesh could have organized something in Perithenia. He has gone. Okay.
Okay, bye then. Bye.
Bye then, good night.
Good night.